Translator, Dark Angel, Kurisu. With a thought from Linghan, a wisp of command rode his mind, and that single drop of indestructible true fluid instantly scattered. Like dawn dew meeting spring wind, it seeped into every inch of his flesh, soaking into sinew and marrow alike. His shattered organs and the bones cracked within him mended at a pace that made one's scalp go numb. One must understand, even with Linghan's heaven-defying talent, he had still spent 10,000 years to comprehend the first level of the cultivation techniques of the indestructible Heaven Scroll. How could the lone drop of indestructible true fluid that he had painstakingly condensed be anything but frighteningly profound? It could nearly snatch a soul back from the yellow springs, regrow flesh upon bare bone. It could absolutely be called the supreme treasured medicine. Yay. At last, someone noticed Linghan had actually sat upright, and shock flashed across his face. They all knew perfectly well that in that storm of blows just now, none of them had thrown a killing move. Yet so many had struck together at the same moment. Even without intent to kill, it should have been more than enough to leave Linghan grievously wounded. There was nothing to be done about it. Who told this brat to be blind to what was good for him? In a way, this would teach him a hard-earned lesson. Yet the brat had stood up so quickly. The shock was enough to make their eyes nearly pop from their sockets. How could this be? Could it be that this brat wore some treasured armor, capable of dispersing part of the force of any attack that landed upon him? That had to be it. What other possibility could there be? Brat, hand over the treasured saber. That is not something that you should wield. A middle-aged man barked. Linghan's eyes snapped open. The indestructible true fluid had already fully displayed its might, letting his injuries mostly recover. He did not answer the man. Instead, he sent his divine sense into the treasured saber in his hands, probing to awaken the spiritual tool hidden within. He was no fool. He could mend himself once with the aid of the indestructible true fluid, but there was no chance of a second time. Since he dared to seize prey from the tiger's jaws, then he would have to revive this treasured saber. With it restored, what could a mere handful of gushing spring-tier martial artists possibly do to him? He was Zhang Yuefeng's master, and the others' martial arts had all been taught by him. Their paths were of the same lineage, so there was a great likelihood he could stir the treasured tool. Zhang Yuefeng had left behind. This was a gamble, but there was no room left to weigh it further. How dare you ignore me, little junior? The same middle-aged man instantly flew into a rage. Everyone here was either an heir of the imperial family or of the 8 great clans. Each carried sky-high pride. How could they tolerate a junior putting on airs before them? He moved at once. His origin power took form, swelling into a gigantic palm that swept toward Linghan in a grabbing strike. Liyuan, you wish! Immediately, someone else leapt in to block him. Of course, he was not trying to help Linghan. Rather, he feared Liyuan would use this chance to snatch the treasured saber first. Bastard! Liyuan indeed harbored that very intention, and the obstruction made him furious. He could not help but immediately clash with the one who tried to stop him. Brat, hand over the treasured saber. Another person charged in, intent on seizing the blade. It's mine! Mine! The chaotic melee erupted again. They fought one another, all trying to press close to Linghan. If they captured this brat, they could obtain the treasured saber. As for Linghan's own strength, they all subconsciously dismissed it. He was, after all, only a brat at the 5th layer of element gathering tier. You all, have you had enough? Linghan suddenly rose to his feet. His gaze swept over the crowd, trembling with an overbearing force. All of them jolted. It was as if the youth before them was not a minor element-gathering tier martial artist, but an ultimate warrior, one even stronger than the elders of their own clans. Before Linghan, they felt inexplicably small and weak, but they immediately recovered their senses. A mere little brat, and he had actually made them feel this way? This was far too shameful. Hand over the treasured saber quickly. Liyuan moved again, reaching for Linghan with a grabbing motion. Get lost. Linghan slashed out with the saber. Shua! A brilliant flash burst from the blade, bright as a shooting star, tearing through night. Pooh! Liyuan staggered backward at once, one hand clamped to his chest. Fresh blood surged between his fingers, and his face turned deathly pale in an instant. What? Everyone else stood dumbfounded. One had to know Li Yuan was at the 9th layer of Gushing Spring Tier, yet he had been injured by a single casual wave of Ling Han's saber. How could they accept such a reality? The treasured saber. It had to be the saber's might. It was nothing new for them to obtain damaged spiritual tools. After all, those were like corpses. Their value lay only in the martial intent engraved within the seals on the body of the tools. But Ling Han had only just acquired this treasured saber, and yet he could actually rouse its might. How inconceivable was that? Ling Han stood firm, saber in hand, and asked, "Just now, you all really had fun ganging up on me, huh?" Hiss! They all could not help but retreat a step. Who could have imagined that a junior at the 5th layer of Element Gathering Tier would suddenly possess the power to threaten high-level Gushing Spring Tier martial artists? There was no way Ling Han would remain polite. He lunged forward, and the treasured saber in his hand spat light again and again. The saber's might was not something mere Gushing Spring Tier martial artists could withstand. As its radiance swept over them, without exception, they were hurled backward by the force behind the blows. How could this be? This brat actually managed to resuscitate the spiritual tool. I don't believe it. All spiritual tools that can be successfully captured had their spirits deteriorated. Not even powerful warriors of spiritual ocean tier would be able to activate their abilities. Yet how could it be that a little brat of element gathering tier actually managed to activate the might of the spiritual tool? Everyone was gasping, trapped in utter disbelief. But whether they believed or not, what could it change? Now they could only suffer a ruthless beating at Ling Han's hands. Ah! Their screams rang out. Just now, Ling Han had been badly injured by them. Now the tables had turned. How could he possibly show mercy? As Saberlight danced, these people were thrashed with ease. As for Liu Bu Cheng, his face twitched uncontrollably. Thank goodness he had moved to stop Lu Yutong, and thus had not joined the ganging up on Ling Han. Otherwise, he would not have been spared in this beating. To be thrashed like this by a mere junior, how humiliating! But was this brat a monster? Why could he activate an ancient spiritual tool? After Ling Han had heavily thrashed Li Yuan and the others, he stared at Liu Bu Cheng for a moment. That stare made chill rise in Liu Bu Cheng's heart. At last, Ling Han lowered the saber's hilt and sighed to himself. This saber was far too severely damaged. The spirit within had long since died. Only a tiny scrap of consciousness remained. Because his martial intent ran in the same vein as Zhang Yuefeng's, he had managed to stir that scrap of consciousness, but he would not be able to use it many more times before even this remnant completely withered away. By then, aside from being somewhat sharper, there would be no difference between this saber and any ordinary weapon. Ling Han, are you all right? Lu Yutong and Li Xichan stepped forward at the same time. How could this brat not be all right? Can't you two see the others have all been thrashed half to death? Liu Bu Cheng sneered inwardly. Ling Han's thoughts were tangled, so he only nodded to the two girls, then took the saber and returned to his own tent. Though he had injured many people, it was entirely normal for fights and injuries to happen when treasures were involved. Moreover, with Wu Songlin's backing, and with everyone needing to give face to Wu Songlin, who would dare say anything? Besides, a whole crowd of Gushing Spring Tier martial artists had lost to a youth at the 5th layer of Element Gathering Tier. How could they possibly swallow their pride and openly declare revenge or the like? Ling Han sat within his tent, placed the saber across his lap, and studied it closely. If the spirit within had not died, then with his current strength, there was no way he could control this saber. The saber would only need to release a trace of aura, and he would be killed on the spot. But now, this had instead given him the chance to examine it up close. Zhang Yefeng had broken through to Heaven Tier. Ling Han first confirmed this, because the martial intent engraved in the seals on the saber had reached a level equal to his own in his previous life. Thus there was no doubt. This was a spiritual tool. Zhang Yuefeng had forged after breaking through to Heaven Tier. Yet a weapon belonging to an ultimate Heaven Tier warrior had been heavily damaged in battle, and even the spirit within this spiritual tool was dead. What kind of enemy had Zhang Yuefeng actually encountered? Editor Kurisu. Moreover, among all his disciples, Zhang Yue Feng's natural gifts had been the shallowest. If even he could force open the gate and step into heaven tier, then his other three disciples would certainly have already broken through as well. Should the four of them join hands, Ling Han truly could not think of a single person who could stand against them. Yet Zhang Yue Feng's saber, its weapon spirit once proud, was now shattered to such a degree, broken clean through as if it had endured a heaven-shaking slaughter, and it had drifted out upon the waters of an underground river alongside other spiritual tools. Could it be that the ultimate warriors of heaven tier had once fought a chaotic battle to the death? Ling Han raised a hand and lightly tapped the saber's blade. In his heart, he had already decided. No matter what, he had to travel to the source of this underground river and see with his own eyes. However, he had managed to awaken a spiritual tool and even defeat a great swarm of Gushing Spring tier elites. Such a commotion naturally stirred the interest and attention of the higher ranks, and thus he was invited over that night, supposedly to study the secrets behind the spiritual tools together. Ling Han did not refuse. He, too, wished to examine the other spiritual tools. Thus, on that night, a total of 11 spiritual tools were laid out upon a table before him. Each looked battered and worn, as though injured and half-ruined. If no one said so, who would believe that the things resting on this table were all treasures beyond measure? Young friend Ling, how did you manage to resuscitate the spiritual tool? Asked a spiritual ocean tier expert of the Zhao clan. His name was Zhao Wushui. In his younger days, he had been known as Nobleman Wushui. His name as a romantic had once swept through the entire imperial city, but now he had already reached his twilight years, and the charm and grace of his youth had long since faded into dust. This old man was already at the 9th layer of spiritual ocean tier, and had been stuck there for many years. Even if he somehow advanced and broke through to spiritual pedestal tier, he would not have many years left to enjoy that new station. After all, anyone who failed to break into flower blossom tier was still a mortal. The only difference lay in whether they were a weaker mortal or a stronger one. Ling Han smiled and said, "I don't know either. I only grabbed the spiritual tool and somehow naturally gained the acknowledgement of the spiritual tool." The 7 old men seated there all revealed expressions of disbelief. Yet because Ling Han represented Wusong Lin, no matter how displeased they felt, they did not dare display it too openly. Zhao Wushui smiled and said, "Then that truly is a coincidence. Somehow, young friend Ling is the one who encountered this kind of coincidence." "That's right. I never imagined that something so coincidental would happen either." Ling Han laughed, lifting one of the spiritual tools from the table and examining it with care. The 7 old men did not stop him. Instead, they watched every movement Ling Han made. Perhaps the key to activating these spiritual tools lay in some special motion, so naturally they would not miss a single gesture from him. But they were destined to be disappointed. For this time, Ling Han was truly only studying these spiritual tools. Each of these spiritual tools was severely damaged, and the spirits of some had already completely deteriorated. Furthermore, the martial intent carved into the seals on these spiritual tools belonged to veins entirely different from Ling Han's own. To him, these spiritual tools were no different from trash. Of course, the martial intent engraved within those seals still held extremely high value for research, because Ling Han could confirm that these were all level 9 spiritual tools, forged by powerful heaven-tier warriors. He rubbed his chin, sinking into deep thought. In the generation he had lived through, there had been only 7 powerful heaven-tier warriors. Even if his 4 disciples rapidly climbed into heaven tier after he died, there would have been only 10 heaven tier warriors. Yet here alone, there were already 11 spiritual tools. Ling Han had seen clearly. The martial intents sealed within these 11 spiritual tools were all different. In other words, they had been forged by 11 heaven tier warriors. Moreover, these spiritual tools were only those that had been successfully fished out. A far greater number of spiritual tools had not yet suffered spirit deterioration and had long since slipped beyond capture. If one calculated by this, exactly how many powerful heaven-tier warriors had there been? 100? 1,000? How could there be so many? Ling Han could not understand it. Could it be that after he had died, a golden age had descended upon the martial world, allowing heaven-tier warriors to rise one after another? If not, then how else could such a phenomenon be explained? He carefully examined the other 10 spiritual tools. The martial intents sealed within them were all utterly unfamiliar, and definitely did not belong to the other 6 rulers who had once stood as his equals. It seemed that unless he went to the source of the underground river, there was no way for him to obtain more information. Ling Han shook his head and set the spiritual tool back upon the table. He asked, "Everyone, have you managed to think of some way to break through the invisible blockade and advance to the source of the underground river?" Hearing him address them as everyone, Zhao Wushui and the others all revealed displeased expressions. The hierarchy of the martial world was exceedingly strict, and a mere element-gathering tier youngster actually dared to speak so casually before them? Yet this youth represented Wu Songlin, and Wu Songlin was in spiritual pedestal tier, far stronger than them. By that reasoning, Wu Songlin's representative indeed possessed the qualification to stand as their equal. They felt wronged and vexed, and began to grumble in their hearts about Wu Songlin. Why had he sent such a representative? Wasn't this a deliberate insult to them? There is no way to break through that blockade. Most likely, even spiritual pedestal tier warriors would be helpless against it, unless that person is willing to come. Zhao Wushui shook his head, but when he spoke the last few words, his gaze fell upon an old man. This man belonged to the imperial Qi family, and his name was Qi Jushan. The other 5 spiritual ocean tier warriors all nodded. That person was naturally the mysterious Flower Blossom tier expert of the Qi clan. In their eyes, Flower Blossom tier was the strongest realm in this world, able to accomplish the impossible. Yet Ling Han could not agree with such a view. Flower Blossom tier had indeed stepped beyond the bounds of mortality and possessed terrifying power. For example, a lifespan stretching to 300 years. Or, for another example, the ability to soar through the skies. However, the spiritual tools here were all as high as level 9. What could a level 6 Flower Blossom tier martial artist do against level 9 spiritual tools? In that era, it was even possible that ultimate heaven tier warriors had fallen in battle and had their spiritual tools broken. So how could an invisible wall like this be dispersed by Flower Blossom tier martial artists? He did not point it out, because it was far too shocking to speak aloud. It was better for him to keep a low profile. "Tomorrow, I would like to go take a look," he said. At once, there were voices of objection, yet even more nodded in agreement. "Young friend, please do. You are representing Grandmaster Wu, so you do have this right," Qi Jushan said with a smile. Damn, what a fake smile! Ling Han cursed inwardly. He knew these 7 people still doubted him and wanted to see whether he possessed some special method to dispel the blockade. He did not expose their thoughts. He only nodded, then took the treasured saber and departed. On the next day, he, together with Liu Yu Tong and Li Si Chan, followed the river's course upstream. He had originally intended to advance alone, but he could not withstand the 2 girls pleading, so he could only bring them along. Behind them followed Zhao Wushui and the others. 14 spiritual ocean tier martial artists in total, including a few who had not participated in the discussion the night before. Today, they had all come. The source of this underground river lay at the foot of the mountain, and there was no way to advance further on land. They could only dive into the water to proceed. There were no martial artists who did not know how to swim, so all of them entered the water. They had not gone far before. Everything ahead turned pitch black. If they advanced a bit more, they would not even be able to see their own fingers anymore. They could only feel the bone-piercing cold of the river's waters. Thankfully, air circulated within the underground river. Otherwise, no matter how much better they were at holding their breaths than ordinary people, they would not be able to swim too far. After at least an hour, a spark of light actually appeared ahead, flickering in the darkness. At first, Ling Han thought they had finally emerged from the mountain and that the exit was before them, but very quickly he realized something was wrong. It was actually a seal formed of rays of light, like a fishing net stretched across their path, stopping them from advancing further. "Yi, this is light of God!"